He lay in the snow so long that even hope had begun to feel tired. Cold wrapped around his body, and silence became the only thing that stayed. And somewhere not far away, a little girl was learning the same lesson: how to live quietly, how not to expect too much, how to survive without being seen. Neither of them knew it yet, but that winter was not the end. It was the beginning of something gentle and lasting. If you believe stories like this still matter, you're welcome to stay with us by subscribing, so more quiet miracles can find their way to you. Snow fell without urgency, steady and indifferent, erasing edges and sound alike. Maple Drive lay hushed beneath its weight, a street softened into silence, as if winter itself were holding its breath. The moving truck pulled away just after sunrise. Its tires crunched once, twice, then faded down the street, leaving behind a house that no longer remembered warmth. Number 12 stood stripped of life windows, bare porch hollow, the door shut with a finality that felt heavier than the snow piling against it. Buddy stayed. He was a golden retriever, just over 2 years old, tall and broad through the shoulders, with long legs meant for running, and a chest that hinted at strength he no longer had the chance to use. His coat, once a deep honey gold, had dulled into a pale, uneven shade from weeks of cold and neglect. Snow clung to the feathering along his legs and tail, melting into damp clumps that froze again when the wind cut through him. Buddy stood at the edge of the driveway, his paws slowly sinking into the packed snow. A collar circled his neck, worn frayed, still carrying the faint scent of hands that had once fastened it with care. There was no leash anymore, no bowl, no voice calling his name. Just the road ahead of him and the quiet certainty that something was missing. He watched the street. Dogs understand departure differently than humans do. Buddy did not grasp moving dates or packed boxes or the sharp finality of closed doors. He only knew routine. Morning footsteps, the sound of keys, a familiar car returning at dusk. Those patterns had shaped his world, and now they had vanished without explanation. So he waited. At first, the waiting felt natural, loyal, correct. Hours passed. Snow continued to fall. The house behind him remained silent, its windows reflecting nothing but pale sky. Buddy shifted his weight once, then settled again, eyes fixed on the bend in the road where the truck had disappeared. It would come back. It had to. By afternoon, the cold crept into his paws, dull and persistent. By evening, hunger began to gnaw a tight, hollow feeling beneath his ribs. Buddy lowered himself onto the porch, curling slightly, tucking his tail closer to his body. He slept in shallow bursts, waking often ears, twitching at every imagined sound. Morning came without change. The second day he left the porch, not because he wanted to, but because his body demanded something his hope could not provide. Buddy followed scents down the street, nose low, tail hanging heavier with each step. He discovered overturned trash bins, scraps, frozen solid crusts of bread half buried beneath snow. He ate slowly, carefully, saving what little strength he had. The neighborhood noticed him the way people notice things they do not intend to deal with. A man in a dark coat slowed as he passed, brow furrowing briefly before he looked away. A woman glanced from behind her car window lips, pressing together in something like regret. No one stopped. No one called. Winter had a way of making absence feel normal. Buddy learned where the wind cut hardest and where it broke. He slept beneath abandoned porches, pressed close to foundations that still held traces of warmth. His breath steamed faintly in the air, each exhale shorter than the last. His ribs began to show beneath his coat, sharp lines mapping a hunger that did not ease. He did not bark. Barking was for doors that opened, for people who answered. Days folded into one another, white and gray and endless. The street emptied further as the cold deepened. Footsteps, rare voices swallowed by scarves and haste. Maple Drive became a place people passed through quickly, eyes down, shoulders hunched, intent on warmth, waiting elsewhere. Behind the houses, beyond the line of bare trees, stretched a narrow strip of woods. It wasn't much, just enough space for deer tracks and broken branches, for things people didn't want too close. Buddy found it one evening following a scent that cut through the cold with promise old food, something metallic, something wrong. Snow lay deeper there, untouched and quiet. The trap was hidden beneath it. When it snapped shut around his front leg, the sound was sudden and brutal, tearing through the stillness like a crack in glass. Pain exploded upward, sharp and overwhelming. Buddy cried out once, a startled, broken sound that vanished almost as quickly as it came. Instinct forced him still. He pulled, twisting his body, dragging himself backward through the snow, but the steel jaws held firm, the chain biting deep into frozen ground. Blood darkened the white beneath him, spreading slowly, steaming faintly before freezing at the edges. Buddy's breathing came fast and uneven. His muscles trembled as he tried again, then again, each movement weaker than the last. Snow gathered on his back, on his ears, along the curve of his spine, as if the world were already settling in around him. Time lost meaning. The woods did not respond. No footsteps, no voices. Only the soft hiss of falling snow and the distant creak of branches shifting under their weight. Eventually, Buddy stopped pulling. His body shook not just from pain, but from cold that had worked its way deep into him. Each breath was shallow now, careful, as if drawing air itself required more strength than he could spare. He lowered his head to the snow, resting his chin against the white eyes, half-lidded but still open. Waiting. He waited the way he always had. The snow kept falling, softening the edges of his shape, blurring gold into white. His breaths grew slower, farther apart, the space between them, stretching into something uncertain. That was when movement broke the stillness. Footprints appeared at the edge of the trees, small, uneven, hesitant. Buddy's eyes shifted with effort, focusing through the curtain of snow. Far off at the boundary between woods and neighborhood, a small figure stood motionless, dark against the white. Snow continued to fall. Buddy lay unmoving in the frozen clearing, breath barely visible as the figure remained there, watching from a distance. Emily did not run. She stood there longer than she should have, snow settling into the shoulders of her coat, her breath coming out in small, uneven clouds. The woods felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on your ears and made your own heartbeat sound loud and wrong. Up close, the dog looked bigger than she had expected. The golden retriever lay on his side, one front leg caught in something metal buried beneath the snow. His fur was matted dark, where blood had soaked in and frozen stiff to the touch. His chest rose and fell barely, as if each breath had to be argued for. His eyes were open, glassy, but alert, following her every movement. Emily swallowed. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with narrow shoulders and knees that always seemed to bruise too easily. Her dark brown hair, usually braided tightly by her grandmother each morning, had loosened in the cold strands sticking to her pale cheeks. There was nothing loud or dramatic about her, no sharp movements, no raised voice. People often said she was easy, meaning easy to forget. She took one step closer. Buddy did not bare his teeth. He did not try to pull away. His body trembled, a deep, exhausted shaking, that seemed to come from somewhere far beneath his skin. Emily knelt, without thinking, the snow immediately soaking through her jeans. The cold bit hard, but she barely noticed. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, though the words felt thin in the open air. Her hands hovered for a moment, unsure, then settled gently against his neck. His fur was cold, shockingly so, and beneath it she could feel bone angles where softness should have been. When she touched him, Buddy flinched, then slowly leaned into her palm, as if even pain was better than nothing. Something inside Emily cracked open. She knew that feeling. Emily lived with her grandmother Margaret in a narrow house at the end of Maple Drive. It leaned slightly to one side, like it was tired of standing straight. Margaret was in her late 60s, short and sturdy, with thick gray hair she wore pulled back into a low knot. Her hands were always rough from work cleaning houses, folding laundry for people who never learned her name. Since the accident, Margaret had done her best to fill the spaces Emily's parents left behind. But grief had a weight of its own. It settled into rooms, into routines, into the long silences that stretched between meals. Emily had learned not to ask for much. Wanting felt dangerous. Now, kneeling in the snow, she wanted fiercely. She untangled the scarf from around her neck. It was thin pink, once now faded and frayed at the edges. Her mother had bought it years ago at a gas station on the way home from somewhere. Emily could no longer remember clearly. She wrapped it carefully around Buddy's shoulders, tucking it beneath his chin, trying to block the wind. Buddy's breathing stuttered. Emily's heart jumped. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead briefly to his neck, feeling the faint warmth still trapped there. "Please," she murmured, though she wasn't sure who she was asking. She looked at the trap, then really looked. The steel jaws were locked tight around his leg, half buried in snow and ice. Emily reached out, touched it, and pulled her hand back immediately, fingers stinging. It didn't move. Panic crept in sharp and fast. She was just a kid. She didn't have tools. She didn't have a phone. Margaret always worried Emily would lose one, so they never bought it. The houses nearby felt suddenly very far away, their windows glowing faintly through the trees like something from another world. Emily stood up, then sank back down beside Buddy, torn between leaving to get help and the terrifying thought of what might happen if she did. Buddy's eyes stayed on her. There was no accusation in them, no fear. Just a steady, quiet awareness, like he had already accepted whatever came next. Emily wrapped both arms around herself, shaking harder now than the dog was. She thought of the hospital hallway from 2 winters ago. The smell of disinfectant. The way no one met her eyes when they told her her parents weren't coming back. She remembered standing there, small and invisible, wishing someone would kneel down and tell her she wasn't alone. She leaned down again. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." The words surprised her. They felt heavier than promises usually did. Snow continued to fall, thickening the world around them. Emily stayed there, her hand resting against Buddy's chest, counting his breaths, the way she once counted the seconds between her grandmother's footsteps in the hall at night. From the edge of the woods, Maple Drive looked distant and unreal. No one came. No doors opened. No voices called her name. For the first time in a long while, Emily did not feel like the one being left behind. She felt needed. They could not stay in the woods. Emily knew it the moment Buddy's breathing grew slower, each rise of his chest, barely lifting the scarf she had wrapped around him. Snow crept into every fold of cloth, stealing what little warmth her hands had given. If she stayed, the night would take him. And maybe her too. Margaret moved first. She was not a tall woman nor a gentle-looking one. Years of physical work had compacted her into something solid and unyielding, her shoulders broad beneath her worn coat, her back permanently curved, as if bracing against invisible weight. Her gray hair, pulled back into a knot, had loosened in the cold, thin strands whipping against her weathered face. "We'll bring him home," she said, voice low and firm. "At least in need." They dragged the old wooden sled out from behind the house, its runners screeching softly against ice. It had once carried Emily down small hills when laughter still came easily. Now it carried something heavier than a child. They laid Buddy onto it as carefully as they could. He did not protest. His eyes opened briefly unfocused, then slid shut again. Emily pressed her mittened hand against his chest, counting breaths the way she had learned to count seconds when fear threatened to spill over. 1, 2. Still there. The sled moved slowly along Maple Drive, leaving a thin, crooked line in the snow. Margaret pulled her boots, slipping her breath coming harder with each step. Emily walked beside the sled, one hand gripping the rope when Margaret faltered the other, never leaving Buddy. Their house came into view, dark and small at the end of the street. Margaret stopped. She knew what waited inside: no heat strong enough, no medicine, no tools to deal with steel and blood. She had lived long enough to recognize the limits of grit. "We need help," she said. Emily nodded. They turned toward the nearest house and knocked. The door opened only a few inches. A man Emily had seen before, middle-aged, clean-jacket eyes, already tired of the day, looked down at them. His gaze flicked from Margaret's face to the sled, then away again. "Sorry," he said, before they could speak. "Can't get involved." The door closed. Emily stood very still. They tried the next house. A woman answered this time, tall and thin. Her blonde hair pulled tight, the light from behind her casting long shadows across the snow. She listened, arms crossed, lips pressed together. "That's awful," she said, "but I don't know anything about dogs. You should call animal control. We don't have a phone," Emily said quietly. The woman hesitated for half a second, just long enough for hope to flicker, then shook her head. "I'm sorry." The door shut. House after house, the pattern repeated. Some people didn't answer at all. Lights went dark as they approached. Curtains shifted, then stilled. Others listened politely, faces sympathetic but distant, offering suggestions instead of help. "Call someone. Wait until morning. It's dangerous." No one stepped outside. No one touched the sled. Emily's fingers grew numb. The rope burned against her palm. Her breath came faster now, sharp and panicked despite her effort to stay calm. Each refusal landed heavier than the last, stacking into something that felt familiar, invisible. Margaret said nothing, her jaw tightened, lines deepening around her mouth. She had seen this before in hospitals, in offices, in the spaces where people decided what they could afford to care about. At the far end of the street, they stopped. Buddy's breathing stuttered. Emily dropped to her knees in the snow, pressing her ear against his chest, listening for the sound that anchored her. It was there, faint but stubborn. "I don't understand," Emily whispered. Her voice cracked despite her effort to keep it steady. "He didn't do anything wrong." Margaret knelt beside her, ignoring the pain in her joints, the cold soaking through her clothes. She placed one hand over Emily's, the other on Buddy's side. "People don't always need a reason," she said quietly. "Sometimes they just don't want to see." Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, leaving a wet streak that froze almost immediately. She looked down the street again at the dark windows, the snow-covered steps. the distance that felt suddenly enormous. She stood. "Then we keep trying," she said. Her voice was small, but it did not waver. They turned back toward their house, the sled scraping softly behind them. The night deepened, snow thickening the world, narrowing to the sound of breath and the weight of a single choice. No one had helped them yet. But Emily did not let go of the rope. The first knock came after dark. Margaret was kneeling on the kitchen floor, her sleeves rolled up, hands trembling as she tried to keep pressure on Buddy's leg with a towel already soaked through. Emily sat opposite her back against the cabinet, whispering the same words over and over, like a spell she was afraid to break. "I'm here. I'm here." The knock startled all three of them. Margaret looked up sharply. Emily froze. For a brief, awful moment, Margaret expected another apology, another closed door, another reminder of limits. She opened it anyway. Mr. Harris stood on the porch snow, dusting the shoulders of his heavy coat. He was a tall man in his early 60s, all sharp lines and angles, his beard thick and gray, trimmed short, like someone who preferred things orderly. Years of outdoor labor had carved his face into something weathered and unreadable, his eyes set deep beneath heavy brows. He didn't smile. "I saw you earlier," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel turned over too many winters. Didn't sit right. In his hands was a metal box, dented and scratched, its latch stiff with age. "Old first aid kit," he added. "From when my wife was still alive. She didn't like seeing anything hurt." He held it out, not waiting for permission. Margaret stepped aside. Behind him, a second figure appeared. Mrs. Linda Walsh, wrapped in a thick wool coat, her silver blonde hair tucked into a knit hat. She was in her late 50s, tall and narrow, with a softness to her face that suggested she listened more than she spoke. She carried 2 steaming containers, balanced carefully against her chest. "I made soup," she said gently, meeting Emily's eyes before anyone else's. "For you and your grandmother. You haven't eaten." Emily stared at her, unsure how to react. No one had asked if she was hungry. They came in quietly, as if the house were a fragile thing that might break under too much noise. "Mr." Harris set the kit down and knelt, movements stiff but precise. When he saw the trap, his jaw tightened. "Illegal," he muttered. "Should have been pulled weeks ago." He worked without fuss, pulling on gloves, examining the steel jaws, testing the tension. Emily watched every movement, her hands clenched into her sleeves. "Look away," Margaret murmured. Emily didn't. The trap came off with a sharp metallic snap that echoed too loudly in the small kitchen. Buddy cried out once, a thin sound, then went still again. Mr. Harris immediately pressed fresh bandages into Margaret's hands, his movements practiced steady. "Wrap it tight," he said, "but not too tight." Another knock followed, then another. The door opened to faces Emily recognized, but had never truly seen, neighbors from down the street bundled in coats, eyes uncertain but curious. Someone brought clean towels. Someone else brought a flashlight. A man in a baseball cap introduced himself as Tom, explaining awkwardly that he'd grown up on a farm and knew how to hold a dog still. The kitchen filled slowly, cautiously, like water finding its way into cracks. Last to arrive was Dr. Evelyn Brooks. She was small, almost fragile-looking, with close-cropped white hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. She moved carefully, deliberately, leaning slightly on a cane. Her coat was thin but well kept, her hands steady despite the cold. "I'm retired," she said, almost apologetically, as she washed her hands at the sink. But I still remember the basics. She knelt beside Buddy, her expression softening as she examined him. Her fingers pressed gently along his ribs, his shoulders the injured leg now freed from steel. "He's young," she said, "and he's stubborn. That helps." Emily leaned forward. "Will he live?" Dr. Brooks met her gaze directly. "If he gets through the night," she said honestly, "his chances improve." She cleaned the wound, carefully murmuring reassurance that Buddy could not understand, but seemed to feel. He lifted his head, once eyes searching, and found Emily. His tail gave a faint single thump against the floor. Emily let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Phones buzzed. Messages traveled. By morning, people who had never knocked on Margaret's door before were asking how they could help. Blankets appeared, dog food, offers of rides if needed. Someone set up a space heater in the corner, careful to keep it at a distance. The house felt different. Margaret stood back and watched soup warming her hands, something unfamiliar settling in her chest. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was recognition. Emily sat on the floor beside Buddy, her hand resting lightly against his neck. She looked around at the room full of people and felt something shift inside her, something fragile but real. She had knocked on doors. Now they were open. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small, fragile moments that could have been missed if no one was paying attention. Buddy spent the first days mostly still, his body wrapped in blankets, his injured leg supported with careful padding. The swelling eased slowly, stubbornly, as if his body needed proof that the danger had truly passed. His fur began to lose its dull stiffness, warmth returning where cold had lived for too long. When he tried to stand for the first time, it lasted only a second. His legs trembled muscles, forgetting what balance felt like. And then he folded back onto the blankets with a quiet huff of frustration. Emily gasped and reached for him, then stopped herself, remembering Dr. Brooks's calm instructions. "Let him try," the vet had said. "Failure is part of healing." Emily sat cross-legged on the floor instead, hands clenched tightly in her lap, her whole body leaning forward as if she could hold him upright with will alone. Buddy lifted his head and looked at her tail flicking once against the floor. It was not victory, but it was not fear either. Outside, snow continued to fall, but the house felt warmer now. Not because the heater worked any better, but because the rooms no longer felt empty. Blankets borrowed from neighbors stayed folded on chairs. A bowl of dog food sat by the door, always refilled, before it reached the bottom. Someone had left a small basket of toys on the porch. Soft things, bright colors, nothing sharp or loud. Margaret noticed these things in the quiet moments. She moved differently now, less hunched her shoulders, no longer pulled inward, as if bracing for loss. In the evenings, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching Emily and Buddy share the floor, the soft lamplight rounding the corners of the room. She had spent years surviving. She had forgotten what it felt like to be supported. Emily made routines out of care. Every afternoon she carried Buddy outside into the yard, her breath puffing white in the cold as she encouraged him to stand. The yard was small and uneven, its grass hidden beneath a clean blanket of snow. Emily moved slowly, patiently, counting steps under her breath as Buddy shifted his weight. One step, then another. His injured leg held longer each day, wobbling but willing. When he tired, he rested his head against Emily's knee, his weight grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. Inside, Emily read to him. She chose books she had once loved, stories about brave animals, quiet heroes, children who made it through dark places. She read aloud in a steady voice, sometimes stopping to explain pictures Buddy could not see from his place on the floor. "My mom used to read this one," she said, once tracing a finger along the page. "She always did the voices." Buddy shifted closer, pressing his head more firmly against her leg. Emily talked to him when she didn't read. She told him about her parents, their laughter, their warmth, the way her father used to carry her on his shoulders through falling snow. She told him about the nights she slept with the light on, because darkness felt too big. She told him about the fear that sometimes crept in, quiet and familiar, when she imagined being left behind again. Buddy did not understand the words, but he listened. Neighbors came and went quietly, never overwhelming the space. Mrs. Linda stopped by with soup, her presence gentle and unassuming. Tom brought a new leash and showed Emily how to fit it properly. Dr. Brooks checked Buddy's leg every few days, her hands careful, her praise sparse but sincere. "You're doing well," she told Emily once. "Both of you." Emily held on to that. The changes were subtle, but they added up. Buddy's appetite returned. His coat regained its golden sheen, catching the winter light when he stepped outside. His eyes grew brighter, more curious, tracking movement, instead of staring through it. He began to greet Emily at the door, standing a little straighter each time. Emily changed too. She slept better, no longer waking at every sound. She laughed more easily, a soft sound at first, then freer. When she walked through the neighborhood with Buddy at her side, she held her head a little higher, her steps more confident. People noticed, children waved, adults smiled. Conversations lingered longer on the sidewalk. The story had spread about the girl, the dog, the winter rescue, and it had done something unexpected. It had softened people. On one quiet afternoon, as Emily sat beside Buddy in the yard, book open on her lap, she realized something that made her pause. She wasn't afraid of the dark right now. The snow reflected enough light to keep the world visible, and Buddy's warmth against her leg anchored her to the present. For the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel threatening. It felt peaceful. Buddy rested his head on her knee, eyes half closed, breathing slow and even. His body bore scars that would never fully fade. Emily carried her own, invisible but just as real. Together they learned how to live with them. The snow did not vanish all at once. It thinned, retreated in patches, revealing grass flattened by months of cold and footprints that lingered longer than expected. Maple Drive emerged slowly, as if the street itself needed time to believe the worst had passed. Buddy was the first to test it. He stepped into the yard on a morning that smelled faintly of thaw, his paws sinking into slush instead of ice. His injured leg touched down carefully, then bore weight without the sharp hesitation that had defined his movement for weeks. He took another step, then another. When he broke into a short, uneven run, his body remembered what joy felt like before his mind did. Emily laughed. It surprised her, the sound loud and uncontained, bursting out before she could pull it back. She stood in the yard, hair loose around her shoulders, cheeks flushed from the cold air, watching Buddy loop clumsily around the fence. Her laughter startled a few birds from the trees. Buddy skidded to a stop, turned and ran straight back to her tail, sweeping wide arcs through the melting snow. Margaret watched from the porch. She leaned against the railing, her posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. The lines on her face were still there, deepened by age and work, but something had softened behind her eyes. She held a mug between her hands, steam curling upward, and allowed herself the rare luxury of standing still. The house behind her no longer felt like a place people passed through. It felt lived in. Neighbors stopped by more often now, not with urgency, but with ease. Conversations lingered at the edge of driveways. Someone always asked how Buddy was doing. Someone else asked how Emily was sleeping. The questions were simple, ordinary, and that was what made them remarkable. On a bright afternoon, a woman Emily didn't recognize walked up the path with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her name was Sarah Whitman. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with light brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail and skin weathered just enough to suggest long days spent outdoors. Her expression was warm but professional, her movements practiced without being rushed. "I work with the county," she explained, smiling gently at Emily. "Animal services, but mostly paperwork these days." She knelt to Buddy's level, letting him sniff her hand. He did briefly, then leaned against Emily instead. "That tells me what I need to know," Sarah said, with a small laugh. The process took time, but it was nothing like the fear Emily had imagined. Forms were filled out, questions were asked. Margaret signed where her hands trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of what it meant to claim something good and believe it would stay. When Sarah handed Emily the final document, she paused. "You did something important," she said, "not just for him." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. By late afternoon, the news had spread the way it always did, now quietly, kindly. Someone brought a cake. Another neighbor showed up with a new collar, soft and sturdy. Buddy's name stitched into the fabric. Children from down the street came to throw sticks and watch him run, marveling at how fast he was getting. Maple Drive felt different in motion. Where there had once been passing glances and closed doors, there were now pauses, smiles. The small habit of checking in, not because something was wrong, but because something had gone right. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street, Emily sat on the grass with Buddy's head in her lap. His breathing was easy, now steady, his eyes tracking movement with curiosity instead of caution. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the strength beneath it. "I think he knows," Margaret said, settling beside her. Emily nodded. "I know." The evening cooled quickly, but no one hurried inside. Lights flicked on, one by one along the street, warm squares pushing back the dark. Voices carried, laughter drifted. Winter had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled them. Buddy stood, shook off the last clinging bits of snow, and leaned into Emily's side. She wrapped an arm around his neck, resting her cheek against his fur, the world narrowing to the simple truth of presence. On Maple Drive, a dog once left behind, and a girl who had lost everything found something neither had known how to ask for. They were not alone. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly in a small hand that refuses to let go, in a heart that chooses kindness when it would be easier to walk away. We may call it coincidence. But faith teaches us this God often answers prayers through people. Through the neighbor who finally knocks. Through the child who shows courage beyond her years. Through you when you stop notice and choose compassion in your everyday life. If this story touched your heart, let it travel further. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment not just for us, but for the next person who reads it and feels less alone. And if you believe that kindness still matters in this world, consider subscribing to the channel so these stories can keep reaching those who need them most. May God bless you for watching. May He protect your family, warm your home, and guide your steps. And may He use your small acts of love to become someone else's miracle.